The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the Neasden temple as security teams conducted their final sweeps. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell watched from her position near the ornate entrance, her earpiece crackling with updates from officers positioned throughout the complex. Today would be different from any other day in the temple's history. The king and queen were coming to participate in a spiritual observance that had been planned for months. The Neasden temple, known officially as the Sri Swaminarayan Mandir, stood like a vision from another world in the heart of northwest London. Built entirely without steel or concrete, using only traditional methods and materials, the temple had taken years to complete. Thousands of skilled craftsmen had worked on every intricate detail, from the smallest carved flower to the towering spires that reached toward the sky. Inside the temple, Pramukh Swami, the spiritual leader, moved quietly through the prayer halls with his assistants. They checked every arrangement one final time. Fresh flowers had been placed at each shrine, their sweet fragrance mixing with the gentle smoke from incense burners. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the golden decorations caught the morning light streaming through the windows. "Everything must be perfect," whispered one of the younger priests to his colleague. "This is a moment our community will remember forever." The temple had been chosen for this royal visit after months of careful consideration. The queen had expressed particular interest in learning about different spiritual traditions within Britain's diverse communities. The Hindu community at Neasden had welcomed this opportunity to share their faith and customs with the royal family. Outside, crowds had begun to gather behind the security barriers. Word had spread through the local community despite efforts to keep the visit relatively private. Families arrived with children dressed in their finest clothes, many carrying small flags and flowers. Mrs. Patel, who lived nearby and had watched the temple being built stone by stone, stood with her granddaughter. "Today is very special, Beta," she told the little girl. "The king and queen are coming to our temple. They want to learn about our prayers and our traditions." The little girl looked up with wide eyes. "Will they pray like we do, Nanny?" "They will show respect for our way of praying," her grandmother explained gently. "That is what good people do when they visit places that are sacred to others." Back inside the temple, the preparations continued. The main prayer hall had been arranged with special seating areas where the royal couple would participate in the ceremony. Traditional Indian carpets had been laid out, and cushions placed for comfortable seating during the longer portions of the observance. The spiritual ceremony planned for today was called the Abhishek, a ritual blessing that involved prayers, offerings, and the ceremonial washing of sacred statues with milk, honey, and rose water. It was one of the most important ceremonies in the Hindu tradition, representing purification and devotion. Young volunteers from the community had spent weeks practicing their parts in the ceremony. Some would present flowers and offerings, others would assist with the prayers and chanting. Mira, a 16-year-old student, had been chosen to present a garland of marigolds to the queen. She practiced the proper way to approach and bow, her hands trembling slightly with nervous excitement. Remember, her teacher guided her. Move slowly and with respect. Look into her eyes when you present the garland, and let your heart show the honor you feel. As the morning progressed, the first members of the royal advance team arrived. They moved through the temple with the priests, reviewing security arrangements and the planned sequence of events. The head of royal protocol, James Wellington, had spent considerable time learning about Hindu customs to ensure no cultural mistakes would occur. "The king and queen are genuinely interested in understanding your traditions," he assured Pramukh Swami. "They have studied the significance of today's ceremony and want to participate with proper respect." The spiritual leader smiled warmly. "All souls seeking truth and peace are welcome here. We are honored by their presence and their open hearts." Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, final preparations were underway for the royal departure. The Queen's lady-in-waiting, Lady Catherine Thornfield, reviewed the appropriate attire one last time. The Queen had chosen to wear a simple but elegant dress in soft blue, with a scarf that could be used to cover her head during the most sacred portions of the ceremony. The King, in his private study, read through briefing notes about Hindu philosophy and the specific meanings behind today's rituals. He had always believed that understanding different faiths strengthened the bonds of community, and today's visit represented his commitment to that principle. The diversity of spiritual expression in our nation is one of our greatest strengths, he had told his advisors during the planning phase. When we honor and learn from each tradition, we honor the people who call Britain home. At the temple, the morning prayers had concluded, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. The priests gathered in the main hall for a brief meditation, preparing their minds and hearts for the sacred work ahead. The sound of their chanting created a peaceful atmosphere that seemed to calm even the most nervous volunteers. Dr. Rashid Patel, a professor of religious studies who would serve as cultural liaison during the visit, arrived early to review his notes. He had been asked to provide quiet explanations during the ceremony, helping the royal couple understand the significance of each element they would witness and experience. Today's Abhishek ceremony represents the Hindu understanding of divine presence in all things, he explained to the assembled volunteers during a final briefing. When we offer milk and honey to the sacred images, we are expressing our gratitude for the sweetness and nourishment life provides. When we offer flowers and water, we acknowledge the beauty and life-giving force of nature. The young people listened intently, understanding that they were not just participating in a ceremony, but helping to bridge cultures and create understanding between different communities. Outside, the crowds continued to grow. Television news crews had set up their equipment at respectful distances, and reporters prepared to capture this historic moment. The visit represented something significant in modern British society, the acknowledgement and celebration of the nation's religious diversity at the highest levels. Mrs. Singh, who had traveled from Birmingham with her family, explained the importance of the day to a journalist. For our children to see the King and Queen respecting our traditions, participating in our prayers, this shows them that they belong fully in this country. They are British and Hindu both, and today proves there is no conflict in that. As the morning moved toward noon, the energy around the temple intensified. Security teams reported all clear, volunteers took their positions, and the priests began the preliminary prayers that would prepare the sacred space for the royal arrival. Inside the temple, the carved pillars seemed to glow in the filtered sunlight. Each pillar told stories from Hindu scriptures, depicting gods and goddesses, moral lessons, and spiritual truths. The craftsmanship represented thousands of years of artistic tradition, brought to life by modern artisans who had learned their skills from masters in India. The main shrine, where today's ceremony would center, housed beautifully carved images of Hindu deities. These were not mere decorations, but sacred presences, believed to embody divine qualities of love, wisdom, courage, and compassion. Fresh flowers adorned each image, and small oil lamps flickered gently, creating an atmosphere of reverence and peace. Pramukh Swami stood before the main shrine, offering a silent prayer for the success of today's ceremony. He thought about the bridge being built between communities, the understanding being fostered, and the respect being shown. In his many years of spiritual leadership, he had always taught that all sincere seekers of truth walk the same essential path, regardless of the specific forms their seeking might take. Today we welcome guests who rule with wisdom, he prayed silently. May their hearts be touched by the universal love that flows through all genuine spiritual practice. May this ceremony plant seeds of understanding that will grow into forests of peace. The final preparations were nearly complete. Fresh rose petals had been scattered along the path the royal couple would walk. The ceremonial items needed for the Abhishek had been blessed and arranged. Silver vessels containing milk and honey, bowls of rose water, trays of flowers, and small lamps that would be lit at the appropriate moments. Young Mira stood with the other volunteers, her marigold garland carefully preserved in a cool place to keep the flowers fresh. She thought about her grandmother, who had immigrated to Britain decades earlier and had dreamed of a day when Hindu traditions would be honored at the highest levels of British society. Nanny would have cried tears of joy to see this day, she whispered to her friend standing beside her. As the appointed time approached, a quiet sense of sacred anticipation settled over the temple. This would be more than a ceremonial visit. It would be a genuine spiritual encounter, a moment when different traditions would meet in mutual respect and shared recognition of the divine mystery that touches all human hearts. The stage was set for an extraordinary day that would create memories lasting far beyond the ceremony itself. In a world often divided by differences, today would celebrate the unity that underlies all sincere spiritual seeking. The king and queen were about to experience not just Hindu tradition, but the universal human longing for meaning, peace, and connection with something greater than ourselves. The temple bells began to ring softly in the distance, signaling that the most important guests in the building's history would soon arrive to join in one of humanity's oldest forms of spiritual expression, the offering of prayers, gratitude, and devotion in community with others seeking the same eternal truths. The royal motorcade turned onto the temple grounds at precisely 12:30. The king and queen sat quietly in the back seat of their vehicle, both looking out at the magnificent structure that rose before them. The queen reached over and squeezed her husband's hand gently, a gesture that spoke of shared anticipation for the spiritual experience ahead. "It's even more beautiful than the photographs showed," the queen murmured, taking in the intricate carvings and soaring spires of the temple. The king nodded, equally impressed. To think this was built using techniques thousands of years old, right here in modern London. It's a testament to the dedication and skill of the community. As their car came to a stop, both could see the crowds gathered behind barriers, families with children waving small flags, elderly members of the Hindu community with hands pressed together in respectful greeting. The genuine warmth radiating from the assembled people was immediately apparent. Pramukh Swami emerged from the temple entrance, accompanied by other senior priests and community leaders. All wore traditional white clothes, their peaceful demeanor creating an atmosphere of spiritual calm that seemed to extend even to the security personnel positioned around the area. James Wellington, the protocol officer, stepped from the lead car and approached the spiritual leader. "Pramukh Swami, their majesties are honored to be here and deeply appreciate your welcome." The elderly spiritual teacher bowed slightly, his eyes twinkling with genuine pleasure. "The honor is entirely ours. Today our temple becomes a bridge between hearts seeking the same divine truth." The king and queen emerged from their vehicle to warm applause from the gathered community. They moved with unhurried dignity toward the temple entrance, stopping to acknowledge the children who had been allowed to stand near the front of the crowd. The queen bent down to receive a small bouquet from a shy 5-year-old girl, accepting it with such grace that the child's nervous expression melted into a radiant smile. "Thank you, darling," the queen said softly. "These flowers are beautiful, just like your smile." The little girl giggled and pressed closer to her mother, who wiped away tears of joy at seeing her daughter's moment with royalty. Moving toward the temple entrance, the royal couple paused to remove their shoes, following Hindu custom. This simple act sent a powerful message to the watching community that respect for tradition begins with the smallest gestures of cultural sensitivity. Dr. Rashid Patel stepped forward to offer a brief explanation. "In Hindu tradition, we remove shoes before entering sacred spaces as a sign of respect and humility. The ground inside is considered blessed." "Of course," the king replied. "We're grateful for your guidance in helping us observe your customs properly." As they entered the temple, both the king and queen fell silent, overwhelmed by the sheer beauty surrounding them. The carved columns rose like frozen music, each surface telling stories of ancient wisdom and spiritual truth. The air carried the gentle fragrance of jasmine and rose, mixed with the sacred smoke from oil lamps that had burned continuously for years. "This is extraordinary," the queen whispered to her husband. I can feel the devotion that went into creating every single detail." Pramukhswami overheard her comment and smiled. "Your Majesty sees with the eyes of the heart." Yes, every carving was made with prayer, every stone placed with love. This is what happens when spiritual devotion guides skilled hands. They walked slowly through the entrance hall, giving the royal couple time to absorb the visual feast around them. Young volunteers lined their path, each holding small trays of flower petals that they sprinkled gently as the procession moved forward. The children's faces glowed with excitement and reverence, understanding they were participating in something historic. Mira stood near the entrance to the main prayer hall, her marigold garland ready. When the queen approached, the teenager stepped forward with careful grace, bowing as she had practiced for weeks. "Your Majesty," Mira said in a clear voice, "our community offers you this garland as a symbol of respect and welcome. In our tradition, marigolds represent the sun's blessing and the warmth of friendship." The queen accepted the garland with both hands, her expression showing genuine appreciation for both the gift and the young woman's poise. "Thank you so much. I'm honored to wear it, and I'm impressed by your knowledge of your traditions." Mira beamed, the nervousness she had felt for weeks melting away in the face of the queen's kindness. As they entered the main prayer hall, the king and queen were invited to sit on the specially prepared carpets and cushions. Dr. Patel positioned himself nearby, ready to provide quiet explanations as the ceremony unfolded. "The ceremony you're about to witness," he explained softly, "is called Abhishek. It's one of our most sacred rituals, involving the offering of various substances to the divine images as expressions of gratitude and devotion." The priests began with the lighting of oil lamps, their small flames dancing in the gentle air currents. The sound of bells filled the hall as the formal prayers commenced. The king and queen listened respectfully, occasionally asking whispered questions about the meaning of specific chants or gestures. The first phase of the ceremony involved the presentation of flowers. Young volunteers approached the shrine in pairs, carrying trays loaded with roses, jasmine, and marigolds. Each flower was placed with deliberate care, building colorful patterns around the sacred images. "In our tradition," Dr. Patel explained quietly, "flowers represent the beauty and fragrance we wish to offer back to the divine. They remind us that life is brief and precious, like the blooming of a flower." The queen watched intently as each flower was placed, her artist's eye appreciating both the visual beauty and the spiritual symbolism. "There's something profound about offering the most beautiful things in nature as expressions of gratitude," she murmured. The ceremony continued with the offering of milk, a substance considered pure and nourishing. The priests chanted ancient Sanskrit verses as they poured the milk over the sacred images in flowing ceremonial patterns. The white liquid caught the light from the oil lamps, creating an almost mystical effect. "Milk represents the nourishment that life provides." Dr. Patel continued his gentle explanation. "We offer it back to acknowledge that all nourishment, physical and spiritual, comes from divine grace." The king found himself deeply moved by the symbolism. Throughout his life, he had encountered many different forms of spiritual expression, but there was something particularly touching about this ritual offering of life's most basic necessities. Next came the offering of honey, golden and sweet. As the priest drizzled it carefully over the images, the entire hall seemed to fill with a sense of sweetness that went beyond the physical senses. "Honey represents the sweetness of divine love," Dr. Patel whispered. "It reminds us that spiritual life should be filled with joy and sweetness, not burden and hardship." A small group of musicians began playing traditional instruments, tabla drums, a harmonium, and small cymbals. The music was gentle and meditative, creating a sound environment that seemed to lift the spirits of everyone present. Several members of the community joined in with quiet chanting, their voices blending in harmonious devotion. The queen found herself particularly moved by the children's participation in the chanting. Their clear, innocent voices seemed to carry an especially pure quality that touched something deep in her heart. She thought about her own grandchildren and how important it was for young people to have spiritual traditions that connected them to something larger than themselves. As the ceremony progressed, rose water was sprinkled throughout the hall, its delicate fragrance adding another layer to the sensory experience. The priests moved with practiced grace, each gesture polished by years of repetition, yet still performed with fresh devotion. Rose water symbolizes the beauty and fragrance that a spiritual life should bring to the world. Dr. Patel continued, "When we live with love and compassion, we become like roses, bringing beauty wherever we go." The king appreciated this metaphor particularly, thinking about his role as a monarch and how he hoped his life and service might bring positive influence to those around him. During a quieter moment in the ceremony, Pramukh Swami approached the royal couple with a special offering, a small statue of Ganesha, the elephant-headed deity known as the remover of obstacles and the patron of new beginnings. "Your Majesties," the spiritual leader said softly, "we would like to present you with this image of Lord Ganesha. In our tradition, he blesses all new undertakings and helps overcome difficulties. We offer this as our prayer that your reign may be blessed with wisdom and that any obstacles to peace and understanding in our nation may be removed." Both the king and queen were visibly touched by this thoughtful gesture. The queen accepted the small statue with reverent care, understanding that she was receiving something considered sacred by the community. "This means more to us than we can express," the king responded. "We will treasure it not just as a beautiful object, but as a symbol of the bridge of understanding we're building together today." The ceremony continued with the offering of sacred threads, small pieces of blessed cloth that would later be distributed to community members as reminders of today's special observance. The priests wove these threads around the images while chanting prayers for peace, prosperity, and spiritual growth. As the formal portions of the Abhishek drew toward a close, the entire community joined in a final chant. Voices of all ages blended together. Elderly grandparents who had brought their traditions from India decades earlier, middle-aged professionals who balanced ancient spiritual practices with modern careers, and children who represented the future of Hindu tradition in Britain. The sound was incredibly moving, representing not just a religious ceremony, but a living community maintaining its spiritual heritage while fully participating in British society. The king and queen found themselves deeply affected by this demonstration of cultural continuity and adaptation. As the last notes of the chanting faded, a profound silence settled over the hall. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with spiritual presence, as if the ceremony had opened a doorway to something sacred that touched everyone present. The queen reached over and took her husband's hand again, both of them understanding that they had just experienced something that would stay with them forever. This had been more than a ceremonial visit. It had been a genuine encounter with the spiritual heart of a vibrant community that called Britain home. Following the completion of the Abhishek ceremony, Pramukh Swami invited the king and queen to participate in a special prasadam ceremony, the sharing of blessed food that had been offered during the prayers. This represented one of the most intimate aspects of Hindu spiritual practice, where the divine blessings received through worship are shared with the entire community. The sacred food had been prepared early that morning by a team of devoted volunteers, each dish made with ingredients that had been blessed and offered to the deities during preliminary prayers. Simple but delicious vegetarian fare awaited, fresh fruits, traditional sweets made with milk and honey, and specially blessed water that had been used in the ceremony. In our tradition, Dr. Patel explained, as they moved toward the area where the prasadam would be served, sharing food that has been offered in worship creates a spiritual bond between all who partake. It represents our belief that divine blessings are meant to be shared, not hoarded. The Queen found this concept particularly meaningful. How beautiful that spiritual practice includes this element of community sharing. It makes faith something lived and shared rather than just individually experienced. A group of elderly women from the community, dressed in their finest silk saris, had been given the honor of serving the prasadam to the royal guests. Mrs. Gupta, who had immigrated to Britain in the 1960s and had watched the Hindu community grow and flourish over the decades, stepped forward with a silver tray containing various blessed foods. "Your Majesty," she said in careful English, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "it is my greatest joy to offer you prasadam from our temple. This food carries the blessings of our prayers and our love for you." The Queen accepted a small portion of each item on the tray, understanding the significance of the moment. "Mrs. Gupta, the honor is mine. To receive food prepared with such devotion and blessed through your prayers, I feel very privileged." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears of happiness. Later, she would tell her grandchildren about this moment when the Queen of England accepted prasadam from her hands with such grace and respect. The king also participated in the prasadam ceremony, accepting the blessed food with visible appreciation for its spiritual significance. As they ate together in the temple's community hall, surrounded by members of the Hindu community, the barriers between royal guests and local residents seemed to dissolve into a shared experience of spiritual fellowship. During this more informal portion of the visit, the royal couple had the opportunity to speak with various community members. They were introduced to families who had fascinating stories of migration, adaptation, and success in British society while maintaining their spiritual and cultural heritage. Mr. Patel, a retired engineer who had helped design part of London's transportation system, spoke about the challenge and joy of raising children who were equally comfortable in Hindu temples and British schools. "My daughter is a doctor now," he told the king with obvious pride. "She serves patients of all backgrounds, but she still comes to temple every week to remember her roots and find spiritual strength." The king was genuinely interested in these personal stories. This is exactly what makes our nation strong. People who contribute their talents fully while maintaining the spiritual traditions that sustain them. Your family represents the best of British diversity. Young Ravi, a university student studying computer science, was invited to explain how his generation balanced traditional spiritual practice with modern careers and technology. "We use apps to learn Sanskrit prayers," he said with a shy smile, "and we organize temple events through social media. But when we're here in the temple, chanting the same prayers our ancestors chanted thousands of years ago, we connect with something timeless." The Queen was fascinated by this blend of ancient and modern. Technology can be a tool for preserving and sharing spiritual traditions, not just for replacing them. Your generation is finding creative ways to honor the past while embracing the future. As they moved through the temple complex, Pramukh Swami guided them to see other areas where different aspects of Hindu spiritual life were practiced. They visited the meditation hall, where community members came for quiet reflection and personal prayer. The simple room, with its bare walls and cushions arranged in a circle, created an atmosphere of profound peace. "Meditation is the heart of spiritual practice," the spiritual leader explained. "In this room, people from all walks of life come to find inner peace and connect with divine presence. A businessman sits next to a grandmother, a student next to a teacher, all seeking the same essential truth." The king spent several minutes in contemplative silence in the meditation room, appreciating its atmosphere of tranquil spirituality. "There's something universal about the human need for quiet reflection and connection with something greater than ourselves," he observed. "Spaces like this serve such an important purpose in our busy world." Their tour continued to the temple's cultural and educational areas, where classes were held in traditional Indian arts, languages, and spiritual teachings. They observed a group of children learning classical Indian dance, their small feet moving in intricate patterns that told stories from Hindu scriptures. Cultural preservation through artistic expression, the Queen noted approvingly. "These children are learning not just dance steps, but the stories and values that have sustained your community across generations." The dance teacher, Mrs. Sharma, explained how the movements conveyed spiritual meanings. Each gesture has significance, Your Majesty. This movement represents the flow of divine energy. This one shows devotion and surrender. Through dance, the children absorb spiritual teachings naturally. The royal couple was then invited to observe a language class where teenagers were learning Sanskrit, the ancient language of Hindu scriptures. The teacher explained how understanding Sanskrit helped young people connect more deeply with their spiritual heritage. Language carries the essence of a tradition, the teacher shared. When our young people can understand the original words of prayers and scriptures, they connect with thousands of years of wisdom in a very direct way. One of the students, a bright-eyed girl named Priya, recited a Sanskrit verse about universal peace with remarkable fluency. The queen was impressed both by her pronunciation and by the profound meaning of the ancient words. "What beautiful words," the queen commented. "Peace and harmony are aspirations that transcend any particular tradition. They speak to the deepest hopes of all humanity." As the afternoon progressed, the royal couple was invited to participate in a tree-planting ceremony in the temple's garden area. This ritual, called Vriksha Seva, or service to trees, represented the Hindu understanding of environmental stewardship as a spiritual responsibility. In our tradition, Dr. Patel explained as they gathered around the young tree that would be planted, caring for nature is considered a sacred duty. Trees provide life-giving oxygen, fruits for nourishment, shade for comfort, and beauty for the spirit. The king and queen each took turns adding soil around the small tree's roots, understanding that they were participating in a ritual that connected environmental responsibility with spiritual practice. "This seems especially relevant in our current era," the king observed. Combining spiritual consciousness with environmental stewardship creates a powerful framework for addressing modern challenges. Young volunteers brought water in decorated vessels to nourish the newly planted tree. As they poured the water around its base, they chanted Sanskrit verses asking for the tree's healthy growth and for its blessings of shade and beauty for future generations. The ceremony concluded with everyone present placing their hands briefly on the tree's small trunk, offering silent prayers for its well-being. The queen found this moment particularly moving. The idea of a community united in caring for a single small tree seemed to represent something essential about human cooperation and hope. "There's something profound about planting a tree you may never see fully grown," she reflected. "It's an act of faith in the future and a gift to people not yet born." As the formal ceremonies drew toward a close, the community presented the royal couple with a specially commissioned artwork, a detailed carving depicting the Tree of Life, created by master craftsmen using traditional techniques. The piece had taken months to complete and represented the community's gratitude for the royal visit. This Tree of Life represents our hopes that the understanding and respect shown today will continue to grow and flourish, Pramukh Swami explained as he presented the artwork. Just as a tree provides shelter and nourishment to many different creatures, may the spiritual values we share provide strength and peace to our diverse society. Both the king and queen were visibly moved by the thoughtfulness and artistry of the gift. The intricate carving showed branches extending in all directions, with different types of birds and animals finding homes in its shelter, a perfect metaphor for the inclusive spiritual vision they had experienced throughout the day. As the time for departure approached, community members began gathering for a final blessing ceremony. The entire group formed a large circle in the temple's main hall, with a royal couple invited to stand in the center alongside the spiritual leaders. The community chanted an ancient blessing that asked for peace, prosperity, and spiritual growth for all present. The sound of their united voices filled the magnificent space, creating an atmosphere of profound spiritual unity that seemed to encompass everyone regardless of their particular faith background. "Today has been extraordinary," the queen said softly to her husband as the chanting continued around them. I feel like we've experienced something that will influence how we think about our role and our nation's spiritual diversity." The king nodded, equally moved by the day's experiences. "These are our people too, and their traditions contribute to the richness of British spiritual life. Understanding and respecting that diversity makes us stronger as a nation." As the final blessing concluded, the community members approached the royal couple individually to offer personal thanks and brief words of appreciation. Each interaction was warm and genuine, representing not just ceremonial courtesy, but real human connection across cultural and social boundaries. The experience had transformed a formal royal visit into something much deeper, a genuine encounter between different traditions that had found common ground in shared values of respect, peace, and spiritual seeking. As the royal visit entered its final phase, Pramukh Swami invited the king and queen to join him in the temple's inner sanctum for a private moment of reflection. This sacred space, normally reserved for the most important spiritual observances, represented the heart of the temple's spiritual energy. The inner sanctum was smaller and more intimate than the main prayer hall, with soft lighting from oil lamps creating an atmosphere of profound peace. The walls were adorned with verses from ancient scriptures carved in Sanskrit, their flowing script seeming to dance in the gentle light. At the center stood the most sacred images, surrounded by fresh flowers that filled the space with natural fragrance. "Your Majesties," the spiritual leader said softly, "this is where we come for our deepest prayers and most personal spiritual seeking. I invite you to spend a few moments here in whatever form of reflection feels meaningful to you." The king and queen stood quietly in the sacred space, each lost in personal contemplation. The queen found herself thinking about the responsibility of leadership and how the spiritual tradition she had witnessed today emphasized service to others as a path to divine connection. The ceremonies had shown her how individual spiritual practice could strengthen one's ability to serve the wider community. The king reflected on the day's demonstration of how ancient wisdom could address modern challenges. The emphasis on environmental stewardship, community service, and respect for diversity seemed especially relevant to contemporary leadership responsibilities. After several minutes of shared silence, Pramukh Swami spoke again, his voice carrying the wisdom of decades spent in spiritual guidance. "Leadership, whether spiritual or temporal, requires the same essential qualities: wisdom, compassion, and dedication to the well-being of those we serve. Today we have seen these qualities demonstrated by both of you." The queen was moved by this observation. "Thank you for that recognition. Being here today has reminded us that genuine spiritual practice and responsible leadership draw from the same source: concern for others and commitment to serving something greater than oneself." As they prepared to leave the inner sanctum, the spiritual leader offered them each a small blessed object, prayer beads made from sacred wood that had been carved and blessed specifically for this occasion. "These beads are made from wood taken from a tree that grew in our temple grounds in India for over a century," he explained. "They carry the prayers and blessings of thousands of devotees. We offer them as a reminder of today's experience and the spiritual bond that has been created." Both the king and queen accepted these deeply meaningful gifts with profound gratitude, understanding that they were receiving objects considered sacred by the community and prepared with great care specifically for this visit. Emerging from the inner sanctum, they found the temple's main areas filled with community members who had gathered for a final celebration. Children who had participated in the earlier ceremonies were now arranged in a choir, prepared to sing traditional hymns in English translation so the royal guests could understand their meaning. The children's clear voices rose in songs about peace, love, and the unity that underlies all spiritual seeking. Their innocent expressions and pure tones created an atmosphere that touched everyone present. Many of the adult community members wiped away tears as they watched their children sharing their spiritual heritage with the nation's monarchs. Let peace and love fill every heart. Let wisdom guide us from the start. Though paths may differ, truth is one, like rays of light from the same sun. The queen found herself deeply moved by these words and the sweet voices that carried them. Music has such power to express spiritual truths, she murmured to the king. These children are sharing something beautiful and universal. Following the musical presentation, several community elders approached with stories they wanted to share about their spiritual journey in Britain. Mrs. Desai, who had arrived from Gujarat in 1968 with her husband and 2 small children, spoke about building their first small prayer room in their London flat. "We had no temple then, Your Majesty," she said, her aged voice still strong with conviction. "But we kept our prayers alive in one small room until our community grew large enough to build this beautiful temple. Today, seeing you here honoring our traditions, I think about how far we have come together." Her story represented thousands of similar journeys. Immigrant families maintaining their spiritual heritage while contributing to British society, gradually building communities strong enough to create magnificent temples like Neasden. Dr. Gupta, a retired professor who had taught philosophy at several British universities, offered another perspective on the day's significance. Today represents the fulfillment of a dream many of us carried for decades, that our adopted homeland would not merely tolerate our traditions, but would honor and learn from them. Your presence here sends a message that our spirituality is valued as part of Britain's heritage. The king responded with obvious sincerity. Britain has always been strengthened by the contributions of people from many backgrounds. Your community's commitment to both spiritual practice and civic contribution represents the best of what makes our nation resilient and vibrant. As the afternoon moved toward evening, preparations began for the final ceremony of the visit, the Arti, a ritual of light that represents the victory of spiritual illumination over darkness. This ceremony would include the lighting of hundreds of small oil lamps, creating a visual representation of how individual spiritual practice contributes to the enlightenment of the entire community. Young volunteers moved throughout the temple complex, lighting small clay lamps and placing them in windows, along pathways, and around shrines. As darkness began to fall outside, the temple transformed into a constellation of gentle lights, each flame representing prayers for peace and spiritual growth. The king and queen were invited to light the central lamp that would signal the beginning of the Arti ceremony. Together, they touched a blessed flame to the large oil lamp that stood before the main shrine, watching as its bright light joined the hundreds of smaller flames throughout the temple. Light represents knowledge, truth, and spiritual awakening, Dr. Patel explained as the ceremony began. When we light these lamps together, we create a symbol of how individual spiritual seeking contributes to the enlightenment of the whole community. The community began chanting the Arti prayers, their voices creating a sound that seemed to make the very flames dance with greater brightness. The royal couple stood surrounded by hundreds of community members, all participating in this ancient ritual that connected them to centuries of spiritual tradition while creating something entirely new, a moment when Hindu ritual included Britain's monarchs as honored participants. As the chanting reached its crescendo, small handheld lamps were distributed throughout the gathering. Each person held their individual flame, and together these hundreds of lights created a sea of illumination that filled the temple with warm, golden light. The queen looked around at the faces illuminated by the lamplight. Children and grandparents, students and professionals, all united in this moment of spiritual expression. This is what spiritual community looks like, she thought to herself. People of all ages coming together to celebrate light overcoming darkness, hope overcoming despair. The ceremony concluded with everyone raising their lamps high in a final gesture of offering light to the divine. The visual effect was breathtaking. Hundreds of flames lifting toward the carved ceiling, creating patterns of light that seemed to bring the temple's artistic decorations to life. As the individual lamps were extinguished and the formal ceremonies concluded, the community gathered for informal farewell conversations. The royal couple moved among the groups, expressing personal gratitude to the many people who had made the day so meaningful. They spoke with the young dancers who had performed earlier, complimenting their skill and encouraging them to continue preserving their cultural traditions. They thanked the musicians whose playing had enhanced every ceremony. They expressed appreciation to the volunteers who had prepared food, arranged flowers, and managed countless details that had made everything proceed smoothly. "Today has been a gift to us," the Queen told a group of the elderly community members. "You have shared something precious and sacred, and we will carry these experiences with us always." The King added his own words of gratitude. "Your community represents the very best of British society, people who maintain their spiritual roots while contributing fully to our shared national life. Today has strengthened our understanding of what makes our nation truly great." As the time for departure finally arrived, the entire community gathered in the temple's entrance area for a final blessing. Pramukh Swami offered prayers for the royal family's health and wisdom, for the prosperity and peace of the nation, and for continued understanding between all the diverse communities that call Britain home. The blessing was offered in both Sanskrit and English, ensuring that everyone present could understand its meaning. The ancient words asking for peace, prosperity, and spiritual growth resonated through the temple space, creating a sense of unity that transcended any particular religious tradition. "May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free from suffering," the spiritual leader intoned, his voice carrying the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime dedicated to spiritual service. The royal couple bowed respectfully as the blessing concluded, understanding that they were receiving something precious, prayers offered with genuine love and hope for their welfare and for the welfare of all those they served. As they prepared to leave the temple, both the king and queen paused for one final look at the magnificent structure that had hosted such an extraordinary day. The carved pillars and soaring spires seemed to glow in the evening light, and the sounds of continuing prayers drifted from within. "This place will always hold special meaning for us," the Queen said to Pramukh Swami as they walked toward their waiting car. "Today has been transformative. We understand our role and our nation's diversity differently because of what we've experienced here." The spiritual leader smiled with deep satisfaction. "Your Majesties, you have honored our tradition not just by your presence, but by your open hearts and genuine participation. This day will be remembered for generations as a moment when understanding bridged all differences." As the royal motorcade pulled away from the temple, hundreds of community members lined the pathway, waving and offering final words of gratitude. The king and queen waved back from their car windows, both carrying with them memories and insights that would influence their understanding of leadership and service for years to come. The temple bells rang softly in the gathering darkness, their gentle sound carrying across the surrounding neighborhoods like a benediction. Inside the magnificent building, the oil lamps continued to burn, their steady flames representing the enduring nature of spiritual devotion and the lasting bonds of understanding that had been forged during this historic day. The visit had accomplished far more than anyone had initially hoped. It had created genuine bridges between communities, demonstrated the compatibility of spiritual diversity with national unity, and shown how ancient wisdom traditions could enrich contemporary life. Most importantly, it had revealed the common spiritual aspirations that unite all sincere seekers, regardless of the particular forms their seeking might take. As news of the day's events spread through media reports and personal accounts, the impact extended far beyond the temple walls. Communities across Britain felt affirmed in their own spiritual traditions, understanding that diversity of religious expression was not just tolerated, but actively honored at the highest levels of society. The day at Neasden Temple would be remembered as a moment when Britain's spiritual diversity became a source of strength rather than division, when ancient traditions and modern leadership found common ground and shared commitment to service, peace, and the well-being of all people. It represented the fulfillment of the highest aspirations of a truly diverse and unified nation.